Welcome, everyone, to another deep dive. And this time we are taking a close look at The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat.
By the one and only Oliver Sacks.
Yes, by Dr. Oliver Sacks. This book is full of these fascinating neurological case studies.
It really is.
And it makes you think differently about what the brain even is and what it means to even be human. You know, what is normal?
What is normal?
When it comes to the brain. And I am so glad that you are here today to help break down all these really complex ideas.
I am happy to be here. I am excited to talk about this book.
So are we going to have some aha moments?
I think so.
Today.
I think so.
I hope so.
You might start thinking about your brain a little differently.
Yeah, so speaking of stories, let's start with the one that gave the book its title, right? Dr. P, the man who mistook his wife for a hat.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine reaching for your wife's head thinking it's a hat? It's kind of funny.
It is kind of funny.
But it also opens up this window into a condition called visual agnosia.
Right.
Visual agnosia, it's an interesting condition. It's not that Dr. P couldn't see, right? His eyes were working just fine.
Right.
He could see all the shapes and colors, but his brain couldn't make sense of that visual information.
Wow.
So he could see like the shapes and colors, but he couldn't put it all together and recognize the object.
So he could see his wife, but his brain wasn't registering that was a face.
Like registering it was a face.
Yeah, it's so wild.
It's almost like seeing all of the puzzle pieces, but you just can't quite put it all together to get the full picture.
It's like what we see isn't actually real. It's just our brain's interpretation.
Yeah, it really makes you question, what we actually see
Yeah.
versus how our brain interprets it.
Like, are we living in the Matrix here?
It kind of is like the Matrix a little bit.
This is already mind-blowing, and we're just getting started.
Just getting started.
There's another case that really stood out to me, which is Jimmy G, the man who was perpetually living in 1945.
Oh, yeah.
His story is so sad. It really is. It's heartbreaking. It's heartwarming, too, in a way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
Right.
he had Korsakoff syndrome, so a severe memory impairment that's often linked to alcohol abuse.
Right.
But the amazing thing about Sacks is he doesn't just focus on the medical diagnosis. You
Right.
know, he tells us about Jimmy's life,
Right.
his personality, his struggles.
Yeah.
You know, he really paints a complete picture of this man who is trapped in a time warp, unable to form new memories.
And there are these moments where Jimmy has flashes of clarity, like especially during religious services. And for those brief moments, it's like he was back in the present,
Yeah.
aware of himself, aware of his surroundings. And it's like, what is happening in his brain in those moments?
Like, what is going on in those
That-
moments? You
yeah.
know, and it just makes you realize or think about how complex memory is.
Right.
And how it is tied to our sense of self. So even with this condition, those core memories, those deeply ingrained experiences
Right.
are still accessible to him.
Right.
And it makes you think, it's not just about storing facts,
Yeah.
it's about connecting with who we are at our core.
It's so true. It's so true. I mean, this book is so much more than just these medical stories,
Yeah.
It's about the human experience and how we adapt and how we make sense of this world that we live in, even when
Yeah.
our brains are working differently than we expect them to.
Definitely, yeah.
So I'm ready to keep going.
Okay, let's go.
What other wild cases do we have?
All right, so let's talk about Christina.
Okay. Christina, the woman who lost proprioception.
Proprioception.
Remember her?
It's like the sixth sense, right?
Yeah.
You lose the feeling of where your body is in space.
So it's like knowing where your limbs are without having to look at them.
Exactly. It's that feeling of embodiment, knowing where you are without having to look.
Wow.
And she describes it as this disembodied experience, right? Like she was floating in space.
So she just felt like she was floating.
She felt like she was floating. Imagine trying to walk or do anything
I can't even imagine.
blindfolded without knowing where your legs are.
Oh, that makes me nervous just thinking about that.
It's a little scary.
Yeah. So how did she cope with this huge loss?
It's really remarkable how she adapted.
Yeah.
She had to relearn how to move, how to eat, how to just exist in her body.
Wow.
And she really relied on her vision and other senses to compensate,
That's wild.
for that lack of internal awareness. But it shows you how plastic the brain is. It can rewire itself
Yeah.
to find new ways of functioning.
So we've talked about Dr. P, who couldn't recognize objects,
Uh-huh.
Jimmy G, who's stuck in time,
Yeah.
and now Christina, who feels disconnected from her body.
Right.
And these are all kind of examples of what Sacks calls neurological deficits.
Right. So these are what we would call the deficits.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what's really important is that Sachs didn't just focus on what was missing.
Right.
He was really interested in how these individuals adapted, how they found ways to live meaningful lives despite these challenges.
Yes, and that's what makes this book so powerful.
He saw them as people.
Yes.
As individuals, not just patients.
Yeah, he really humanizes these conditions, and it shows us that, even when the brain malfunctions,
right,
there's still so much we can learn, and there's still so much to appreciate about the human experience.
It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
It really is.
So fascinating.
It is. It's amazing how resilient people can be.
So true. So we've talked about cases where something is missing in the brain, right?
Right.
But Sachs also talks about cases where there's like an excess of function, where the neurological volume is like turned up really high.
Yeah, it's like the brain is firing on all cylinders, but in like these unexpected ways. And one of the most striking examples is Mrs. O.C., who just suddenly started hearing phantom music.
I remember this one. She was hearing full symphonies, like as if there was an orchestra right there in her living room.
Right, and it wasn't just random noise. It was like these fully formed musical pieces. And it turned out to be a form of musical epilepsy where abnormal electrical activity in the temporal lobe triggers these really vivid auditory hallucinations.
Wait, so her brain was basically like creating music out of thin air.
Yeah, pretty much. And the music wasn't even random. She would hear familiar songs sometimes from her childhood, and they would evoke all these powerful memories and emotions.
Okay, that is so interesting. So if it was just like a neurological glitch, like why would she be hearing these specific songs with personal meaning to her?
That's the big question. It makes you wonder about the connection between music and memory and the brain. Is it possible that these hallucinations were tapping into deeper layers of her subconscious, bringing forth these memories and emotions that were otherwise hidden?
That's kind of like her brain was playing her own personal soundtrack.
Yeah, it's like her own internal jukebox.
So, it makes you think about the power of music and how deeply it connects to our experiences.
Absolutely. And it raises another question. If we could somehow cure Mrs. O.C.'s musical epilepsy, would we be taking away a part of her inner world?
That's a really good question. It's like, Are we taking away something that is actually bringing her joy, even if it's caused by this condition?
Right, exactly. And it really highlights the ethical complexities of treating these neurological conditions, especially when they're so intertwined with someone's identity and experience.
It's almost like a real-life version of that movie Awakenings, where the treatment brings the patients back to life, but it also has these unintended consequences.
Exactly. It makes you think about the trade-offs that we have to make in medicine and how we define normal or healthy when it comes to the brain.
My brain is doing backflips right now, just trying to process all of this.
That's good. That means it's working.
But I have a feeling we're about to go even deeper with the next case.
Let's talk about John and Michael.
John and Michael.
The twins.
The twins with savant syndrome.
With savant syndrome.
These twins were like human calculators.
They were amazing.
They could do these complex calculations in their heads.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because they struggled with these basic social interactions and everyday tasks.
Right.
It's just a fascinating paradox.
It makes you really think about the complexity of intelligence and how it can manifest in these really different ways.
Yeah, savant syndrome is often characterized by these remarkable abilities in specific areas like math or music or art.
Right.
But often alongside intellectual disabilities.
But then when the twins were separated, their mathematical abilities diminished.
Yeah, that's the really crazy part. It makes you think that their connection, their unique bond as twins, somehow played a role in their extraordinary talent.
It's almost like their brains were working together like two parts of a whole.
Yeah, that's a fascinating way to think about it.
It just raises these questions about the nature of consciousness and the relationship between the brain and the mind and the role of social interaction in shaping who we are.
It really does.
So we've gone from deficits to excesses, from phantom music to savant syndrome. It's incredible how each case shows us a different side and how complex the brain is.
Yeah, and how it shapes our experience of the world.
But there's also this common thread running through all of these stories.
Yeah, definitely. And it's Sachs's deep respect for his patients and his willingness to see beyond just those labels of illness or disability.
Right. He really celebrates the richness and diversity of human experience, even when that experience is shaped by these neurological differences.
And it just makes you want to ask, what is normal, when it comes to the brain?
Yeah. Is there even such a thing as normal?
Is there even such a thing,
It's like he's saying, don't just focus on what's broken. Appreciate the whole person. the unique way their brain works, the strengths that they possess. And I think that's a really powerful message, especially in a world that often tries to fit everybody into these neat little boxes.
Right, exactly. And Sachs was a true champion of neurodiversity.
Yes, he was.
He argued that these conditions aren't just deficits, they're just variations in how the brain functions.
Right.
And these variations can lead to these unique strengths and perspectives.
Like Jose, the autistic artist. He could capture incredible detail in his drawings, and it's like his autism allowed him to see the world in this totally different way, a way that most of us can't even imagine.
It's like they have this superpower, that we just can't even fathom.
Yeah, and it's like that saying, right? Like, one person's disability is another person's superpower.
Right, exactly.
I mean, it makes you wonder, like, what if instead of trying to fit everyone into this narrow definition of normal, we created a society that valued and supported the unique contributions of everybody, regardless of how their brain is wired?
Imagine what we could accomplish.
Yeah, imagine the possibility.
Imagine the innovation.
Yeah, it's a beautiful vision, a world that celebrates the full spectrum of human potential.
And Sachs believed, that by studying these outliers, these individuals with these unique neurological conditions, that we could gain a deeper understanding of the human brain and what it really means to be human.
I think that's what makes The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat such a profound and enduring book.
It really is.
It's not just about neurology. It's about empathy, understanding, and celebrating the diversity of the human experience.
It really is. I mean, it's about recognizing that we all have our own unique ways of experiencing the world,
Right.
Our own internal landscapes that are shaped by our brains and our experiences.
I feel like this deep dive has been a journey.
Yeah, for sure.
It's really left me with this sense of awe and wonder at just the complexity of the human brain and just the resilience of the human spirit.
And Sachs has this amazing way of opening our minds to these new possibilities and challenging us to see the world through these different lenses.
And I think we could all benefit from a little bit of that perspective.
Yeah.
So to all of our listeners out there, if you haven't already read The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a How, I highly encourage you to check it out. You won't think about your brain the same way again.
You really won't. And remember, the next time that you encounter somebody who seems different, whose brain works in a way that you don't fully understand, remember Sachs's message, Embrace the difference, celebrate the diversity, and you might just discover, a whole new world of possibilities.
That's beautiful. So well said. That brings us to the end of our deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those brains buzzing.